if you all are ready, we will begin with the official statement from Commissioner Frank Strada, followed by Mr. Jeff Monroe, Karen Pulley's brother-in-law, and finally the 6 media witnesses. Commissioner Strada.
All right, good morning. My name is Frank Strada. I'm the Commissioner for Tennessee Department of Correction. And today, by the order of the Supreme Court, the Department of Correction carried out the death sentence of Harold Wayne Nichols by means of lethal injection here at the Riverbend Maximum Security Institution. Inmate Smith was pronounced dead at 10:39 a.m., and his last words were, and I quote, "To the people I've harmed, I'm sorry. To my family, know that I love you. I know where I'm going to. I'm ready to go home." And this concludes my statement.
My name is Jeff Monroe. I am Karen Pulley's brother-in-law. Sorry. My wife, Lisette, is Karen's sister. Lisette was planning on being here, but changed her mind at the last minute. It was just too difficult emotionally for her. Karen and Lisette's parents, Ann and Chuck, passed away years ago. But today, Lisette, our daughters, and other family members that could not be here are having a celebration of life for Karen today. We wish to express our deepest gratitude to the officers and detectives of the Chattanooga Police Department, and in particular, Detective Richard Heck. Also, the team at the Attorney General's Office and the Tennessee Department of Corrections for their tireless efforts to seek justice for Karen. Their dedication has meant more to us than we know how to express. We have waited 37 years for justice, and we understand taking a life is serious. We don't take any pleasure in it. However, the victims, and there were many, were carefully stalked and attacked. The crimes, and there were many, were deliberate, violent, and horrific. Nichols was a violent perpetrator who hunted his victims, stalked them, and then attacked vulnerable women in the most sadistic ways. Our family was destroyed by evil that night in September 1988 when Karen was raped and violently beaten to death in her own bedroom, left to die alone, terribly injured, broken, bleeding, and terrified. Karen was 20. She had just finished Bible school and was attending Chattanooga State to become a paralegal. She'd been a cheerleader at Brainerd Baptist High School. She was bubbly, happy, selfless. She was looking forward to the life in front of her. She was excited about spending time with her sister and holding her niece for the first time. I was serving in the Air Force at the time. Lisette and I had been in the Philippines for 3 years and had only returned to the States a few weeks before. Karen died before we could get to Chattanooga. The responding EMT, a Vietnam medic, said he had never seen anything like it before, not even in combat. No punishment can ever atone for the loss of Karen's life or the damage done to our family, nor is there a punishment that can heal the many victims and families forever broken, battered, and scarred by this man. But this is a start. We are relieved that the nightmare is over and take comfort knowing he never again will be able to hurt anyone else. Moving forward, our family is going to concentrate on the happy memories of Karen and will never again be re-traumatized by this monster. To his other victims, our hearts go out to you. We pray that God grants you peace and healing from the trauma inflicted on you. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kirsten Fiskus, and I'm a breaking news reporter with the Tennessean and USA Today Network. They moved us from our holding room in the prison at 9:46 to the parole board. And then from there, at 10:17, we moved to the witness chamber. At 10:19, the lights went off, and we kind of sat in silence. Nichols' sister was present in the room with us, and she was very emotional about what was about to happen. At 10:24, we could hear movement in the chamber, and then the mic turned on and they did a mic check, and then we could kind of hear his spiritual advisor talking with Nichols very softly. At 10:25, the blinds opened and his spiritual advisor was on his left side. We had a view of Nichols from the right. His arms were outstretched. He had a sheet pulled up to about his belly button, and he was wearing a yellow prison uniform, and he had his black glasses on. His hands were covered by the sheet, but we could see that he had an IV in his right arm just below the crook of his elbow. And then from there, tubes flowed from his body to the wall behind him. They asked if he would like to give any last words at 10:25. And you've already heard them, but I'll repeat them. To which he said, "To the people I've harmed, I'm sorry. To my family, know that I love you. To my friends, I love each one of you. Beyond that, I know where I'm going, so I'm ready to go home." At 10:26, his spiritual advisor leaned down and said he was going to read to him from the Bible and read some prayers. And at one point, he commented that he was probably going to get emotional while he did it. Several times, his spiritual advisor did choke up, and he did let out a couple sobs. Nichols was tapping, looked like he was tapping his right foot. As this was going on, he was reading, his spiritual advisor at 10:28, again, got emotional as he read to him, and Nichols nodded his head in affirmation. And then they moved to the Lord's Prayer, in which Nichols repeated the Lord's Prayer with his spiritual advisor. At 10:29, I noted that Nichols nods and he's blinking, he's still breathing. And then at 10:30, his breath really quickened. He got very deep breaths, and he groaned, and he blew out air out of his mouth a couple of times, moving his mustache like this, twice. And then at 10:31, I noted that his breath slowed, almost to the point where there were no obvious signs of breath. I could not see his chest rising and falling anymore. At 10:32, a little door in the wall opened, and they put out what I think is a white rock in the door. And then about 5 minutes later, they closed the blinds. In the meantime, about 10:36, I noted that his face had gotten really bright red during the process, and at 10:36, it kind of paled to a purple. And then at 10:37, the blinds went down, but the mic was left on. And at 10:39, I noted that there was movement, and you could hear on the mic, and that there were some sniffles, who I presume was his spiritual advisor. And then out of thin air, there was a man who just said 10:39, gave no indication of what that was, presumably time of death. And then a different voice came on over the mic and said the sentence has been carried out, and asked the witnesses to leave. And from there, we left the room.
Good morning, I'm Catherine Sweeney. I'm the health reporter for WPLN Nashville Public Radio. I'm going to repeat a lot of things that you just heard from Kirsten, so I apologize for that. At 10:25, the curtain opened. We heard the last statement. I won't rehash that. There appeared to be a wound on the arm that we could see from the witness stand, and there appeared to be some blood around the IV site. At 10:27, I noted that his one foot was moving. It seemed to be going back and forth. That would have been the right foot closest to us, not the left foot. It seemed to be still. At 10:28, he was nodding along with his spiritual advisor, and I noted that his foot began shifting again. The sheet was pulled up to his restraints. Oscar Franklin Smith's sheet was not pulled up that high. Byron Black's sheet was pulled up that high for about half of the execution, and then somebody in the room pulled the sheet down further, but Harold Wayne Nichols' sheet remained high the entire time. The two began saying the Lord's Prayer together at 10:28, and that's when I started noticing the face might be reddening. It was gradual, so it was hard to tell for sure. At 10:29, he was still speaking. He said, "Thank you." At that point, somebody's breath was coming over the mic. It was hard to tell whether it was his spiritual advisor or his at that point. But at 10:30, I have a note that he began sighing and groaning. There was some congested sounds. And as Kirsten said, his mustache kind of puffed up and down. He had a thick white mustache, and it was a little long. And at 10:31, he became very still. At 10:32, the rock was put out. There was a clicking sound at 10:34. I couldn't identify it, and a mechanical sound shortly after. At 10:35, I noted that he seemed more purple than red, and at 10:36, I noted that he was definitely purple. At 10:37, the curtain closed. We heard some loud bangs, the sound of what seemed like cabinet doors opening and closing, some shuffling paper sounds. As Kirsten noted, sniffling that was presumably from the spiritual advisor, but of course with the curtain closed we couldn't tell. Time of death was announced at 10:39. Again, during Byron Black's execution, the doctor identified himself and said, time of death is the time it was. It was just 10:39. And then somebody else came over the mic and let us know that 10:39 was the time of death and asked the witnesses to leave the room.
Hello, my name is Michelle Herron. I am an anchor with Local 3 News, which is the NBC affiliate in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I'm going to also repeat what others are saying, but from my perspective, what I witnessed, the curtain went up at 10:25. Mr. Nichols said his final words, which I won't repeat here. Then the spiritual advisor read from some verses from the Bible, and Mr. Nichols was emotional during that time and nodded his head. I also saw his right foot kind of moving. Then the spiritual advisor moved on to reading the Lord's Prayer, which Mr. Nichols also recited along with him. Again, both the spiritual advisor and Mr. Nichols were emotional at that time. Bringing us now to around 10:28, I did notice the Mr. Nichols' chest going up and down, and his face did turn pretty red. It was noticeable. I also noticed around 10:30 there was a little bit of moaning and heavy breathing, and I also noticed the air pushing out of his lips. It also sounded almost congested or like a snoring for a little bit. And then at 10:31, I noticed his feet weren't moving. I didn't see any more of the chest going up and down. I didn't see any more movement out of his mouth. From my perspective, I was not able to see the rock being put out, so I'm not going to speak on that. I don't know when they started the injection and when it was finished. I did notice the sheet was pulled up about halfway across his body. His right arm was out, and we could see where the IV was to around his mid-arm. We did see a little bit of blood around that IV site, and I think that's it. I also noticed, I noted around 10:36 that he was losing color in his face. He turned pale and then started to turn blue and then purple. The curtain went down at 10:37, and then at 10:39 is when the announcement came over for the time of death and that the execution had been carried out by the state of Tennessee. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nick Hill with WDF News 12. That is a CBS affiliate in Chattanooga, Tennessee. So I will repeat a lot of what you've already heard so far today. So we were moved into an adjacent conference room around 9:46 a.m., waited there for about half an hour until we were moved into the witness room. That was roughly about 10:19 a.m. We sat in there in the dark for about 6 minutes until the curtain raised up at 10:25 a.m. He was laid back on the gurney the entire time. As the others have mentioned, he had a sheet up about halfway between his belly button and chest. that stayed constant throughout the entire execution, and the chaplain was with him the entire time. And of course, Dave mentioned his last statement: to the people I've harmed, I'm sorry. To my family, know that I love you. To my friends, I love each and every one of you. I know where I am going. I am ready to go home. And at that point, the chaplain went into several liturgies, several prayers. One of those was Psalms 23, which, as the others have mentioned, he was repeating back to him. One thing I noticed during this, and this was roughly around 10:27 a.m., it sounded like Nichols was crying during this back and forth of reading the prayers, saying, I'm sorry. And I could hear, I think I heard that about 2 to 3 times. And the chaplain was also getting emotional during this time. And after the Psalms 23 and that I'm sorry, the Lord's Prayer was read, which is the last time I heard any words from Mr. Nichols. And at about that point, around 10:30, you could start to hear groaning and grunting. But after, when we reached about 10:31, could not hear any more noises from him. Did not see any more movement from him after 10:31. And we just kind of sat there for a couple of minutes. As the others had mentioned, you could see the color slowly receding from his face. I noticed especially around 10:36, 37, you can start to see a little bit of that purple color, as others have mentioned, coming into his face. And then the curtains closed at 10:37. And at that point, we waited for 2 more minutes until they came over the intercom at 10:39. We just heard 10:39 a.m. And then we heard the voice, the order has been executed. Now, I can't mention about the rock and some of the other stuff that some of the others have mentioned, because I was a little bit further back and couldn't see some of those details, but that is what I've got for you.
Good morning. My name is Holly Laren. I'm a digital producer for News Channel 5. We were ushered into the room, and as said before, 10:25, the curtain opened. I apologize in advance. I'll be repeating a lot what's already been said. Mr. Nichols said his last words, ending with, I know where I'm going, and I'm going home. On his right arm, there did seem to be a spot of blood where the IV was inserted. At 10:28, he was speaking with his spiritual advisor. It was a very emotional conversation, saying the Lord's Prayer. At some point, his advisor said, people will tell your story. Mr. Nichols' sister nodded at that. At 10:31, Mr. Nichols seemed to appear still. He seemed to expel a long breath, and his coloration did change, as said before. At 10:37, the curtain closed, and at 10:39, the time of death was reported. I also was not in a position to see a rock being moved, but I was able to see Mr. Nichols' face and his advisors. It was, yes, it was a very sad, emotional conversation. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Travis Lawler with the Associated Press here in Nashville. So at 10:25:19, the curtains were raised. Mr. Nichols was on the gurney. We could see he was perpendicular to us, so we saw basically his right side. He was in a yellow prison shirt. It looked like a white T-shirt under. He had his glasses on. We could see the IV inserted. As people said, it did look like there was a little blood at the insertion site. His chest was strapped down with what looked like a sort of 6-point restraint, looked like a seat belt almost, with the big buckles and black webbing. His foot was twitching, as other people said. There was a second line that looked more like a coated wire that you could see going under his shirt. I think was perhaps that attached to the EKG, but I don't know for sure. He was asked to give his last words, which other people have said. It was a little hard to hear part of what he said, but I believe he said, you know, to the people I've harmed, I'm sorry. To my family, know that I love you. And I believe he said to my multitude of friends, I love each one of you. Beyond that, I know where I'm going, so I'm ready to go home. The pastor started speaking. He was reading from the Bible. He said, this is Jesus speaking, and recited some Bible passages. Then he said, I'm going to say Psalm 23, which you know, and he started speaking, "The Lord is my shepherd," and Mr. Nichols started speaking with him, and they both were sort of choking up a little and tearing up. And then at 10:28:30, the pastor said, "Let's recite the Lord's Prayer together," or I don't know his exact words, but something along those lines. And they started reciting the Lord's Prayer, "Our Father who art in heaven." And when it got to the Amen, I could hear Nichols I could hear him very well say Amen, and he was nodding his head, and the pastor was nodding. The pastor had his hand on Nichols' shoulder, his left shoulder, and was standing behind him from our perspective, and they were nodding at each other, and they were sort of continued talking softly. I couldn't hear everything that they said, or I couldn't hear most of what they said, but I did hear the pastor say, "Go in peace, my friend. I love you." And Mr. Nichols was nodding at him, and at one point he said, "You'll be looking down on us. I know that." The pastor said that. At 10:30:18, we could see Mr. Nichols take a very large breath, and you could see his torso rise up. And then he took a series of these sort of huffing breaths that people said it's sort of maybe a snoring or snorting kind of sound, and you could literally see his mustache rising, like he's breathing through his mouth. About 10 breaths along that, like that, and then it became harder to tell whether he was breathing. His breaths became much shallower. And then at 10:33:35 was when the rock was placed outside, this little sort of flap that we think signals the end of the chemicals being pushed, but we don't know for sure. His skin did change color. I definitely noticed it turned kind of purplish. 10:37:35, they closed the blinds, and then at 10:39 we heard the announcement of death declared. So, although they didn't say that, all they said is the time is 10:39 or something like that. But anyway, thanks. So, people want to ask questions? Is that next? Does everyone want to come up? Does anyone have questions?
For those who have witnessed before, any differences between this one and the others?
Yeah. As I talked about a little bit, the sheet was pulled up a lot higher than it had been before. It was all the way up to the restraint. So we could still see the IV injection site, but pretty much the whole forearm was hidden. And for anybody who wasn't here for the last couple, we could see both Byron Black and Oscar Franklin Smith's hands. They were covered in what appeared to be kinesiology tape. We could not see Harold Wayne Nichols' hands. I think that was the biggest takeaway that was different for me.
I did not witness the last one, but I witnessed the first one, Oscar Franklin Smith, and I commented to them that this one felt very fast compared to the first one. I don't know if it was just because they hadn't done one in a while for Oscar Franklin Smith, and then the hands where you could see that they were bound up for Oscar Franklin Smith, but this time we couldn't even tell that because the sheet was pulled up over his hand.
I think I also was at the Oscar Smith one, and I think that was the first time that they had allowed a spiritual advisor to be in the room with him, and she spoke for a long time. I mean, she spoke for a long time, so I think that is part of why that one was longer. And also with Smith, I didn't see that. I mean, he did, he just sort of seemed to sort of gradually fade away. I don't recall seeing the big huff and hearing the noises that I did with this one. So I don't know what that means, but it's just different.
I agree with Travis on that. I don't think that I remember seeing any kind of distress in Smith. And Byron Black, obviously, he said it's hurting so bad and was groaning. There were no obvious signs of that with Harold Wayne Nichols. He didn't say I'm in pain. It wasn't as explicit. It could have been that he was emotional, but he was showing signs of difficulty breathing. That could be from crying. It could be from something else. We're not sure.
Any other questions?
Were his eyes open or closed?
So I noticed they were open pretty much the whole time, but from the level that he was at my eyesight, it was kind of hard to tell if he closed his eyes completely or if they were very heavily lidded. So it was hard to tell if he closed them completely.
I'll also add, the people who are being executed are perpendicular to us, so we don't see their faces full on, and that makes it a little more difficult to see details like that.
And he was wearing his glasses, which I think also actually obscured his eyes a little bit from my perspective where I was sitting.
Yeah, because I would estimate probably, 10, 15 feet from us, and like basically if you look forward ahead and you're looking at a 90-degree angle, it's kind of difficult to notice that particular detail.
I feel like this was brought into question a lot, especially when we spoke to protesters. And reports say, though he expressed remorse at trial, he admitted he would have continued his violent behavior had he not been arrested. That was back in 1990. Watching that, do you feel that his words and his tears were of remorse, or was it? Do you feel as journalists, though he's been caught and he's going to die today?
Well, it's a hard question to answer, but you know, I mean, you can never truly, when you can't get into the mindset of anyone in that position. To me, it appeared that he seemed genuinely remorseful, but at the same time, it's just, unless you're able to actually get into the mindset of someone in that position, it's just really, really hard to know what exactly their intentions are with their last words.
Do you know the name of the spiritual advisor? Oh, okay. Okay. No, it's J.R. Davis. It's J.R. Davis. Can you describe who else was in the room witnessing?
Yeah, so from my perspective, I was kind of on the end of the first row, and so I have a very not as wide view as like if I was sitting in the middle. But if I leaned forward, I could see there was a gentleman, a younger, maybe a little bit older than me gentleman, in a black suit who was standing there with his arms crossed in front of him. And then it wasn't until they were about to pull the blind down that another older gentleman, also in a black suit, stepped forward. So he was in the corner that I could not see. But as far as I know, there was just those two men, Nichols and his spiritual advisor.
The spiritual advisor stayed with Nichols until the very end.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, he was with him until the end. He had his hand on his shoulder the whole time and was looking down at him. Yeah.
He remained calm, just kind of screaming with them, staying with them until the execution was complete.
You all mentioned Nichols' sister was in there and that she was really emotional. Was she saying anything to you guys? How could you get? Okay, so you guys just gathered that from her crying.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it was very soft tears, wasn't loud or anything overly emotional like that. Just, soft crying pretty much. It was pretty much consistent throughout the entire time, especially once we got past 10:30, 10:31, and he visibly was no longer breathing.
Thank you. So this concludes the news conference, but you all can return to the media staging area at the end of the parking lot